I've been married to Dahlia for 10 years. That's a whole decade of building a life together, for better or worse, or so I thought. Our marriage had always felt like it ran on autopilot. Not in a bad way, just predictable. But lately I noticed cracks in that routine, small at first, but they spread quickly like hairline fractures in glass. And once I started noticing, it became impossible to ignore. It began with her appearance. Dahlia was never the type to care too much about fashion or fitness. I mean, she wasn't lazy, just comfortable. The kind of woman who'd spend Saturdays in yoga pants and oversized sweaters, binge-watching crime dramas. So, when she suddenly overhauled her wardrobe, it threw me off. She started wearing these tight dresses, the kind that hug every curve, and her makeup became more deliberate. Lipstick a bit too bold for a trip to the grocery store, in my opinion. Then came the gym. Dahlia never liked working out. But out of nowhere, she got a membership, started going 3 times a week, and came home drenched in sweat, all flushed and glowing. She told me it was for her health, but something didn't sit right. You spend 10 years with someone, and you learn to pick up on subtle changes, especially when the person you love starts changing for reasons that don't include you. I thought, okay, maybe she's just going through something. I asked her once, casually, if everything was all right. She gave me one of those practice smiles, the kind that don't reach the eyes, and said, "Yeah, just trying to take better care of myself." I nodded, but it felt rehearsed, like a line she'd been preparing for just such a moment. It wasn't long before a new name started slipping into our conversations. Kevin Brent. She'd mention him in passing. "Oh, Kevin said this funny thing today," or "Kevin recommended this book." He was a young, smooth-talking marketing guy who had joined her team recently. But the way she spoke about him, it was different. There was something in her voice, an excitement that hadn't been there in a while. And yet every time I asked about him, she got vague. Too vague. I knew something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Then came the late nights and work meetings. At first, it was just once or twice, but before long, these meetings started bleeding into weekends. And when I'd ask about them, she'd roll her eyes and mutter something about deadlines. I wasn't buying it, but I didn't push yet. The excuses got thinner with each meeting, though. One night, Dahlia came home later than usual, smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. I didn't say anything, but the silence in the room was heavy, like a loaded gun just waiting to go off. That's when I knew I had to start paying attention. Then there was the phone. She started keeping it face down on the table, a small thing, but one I noticed immediately. Dahlia had never been the type to guard her phone like that. We used to be so open, even sharing passwords for convenience. But now, the password had changed, and when I casually asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying it was just a security update. Sure, the final blow came one evening, when she left her phone unattended on the couch while she went to the bathroom. I knew it was a breach of trust, but something in me couldn't resist. I tilted the phone just enough to see the screen light up, and there it was, a message from Kevin. "See you tomorrow? You're out of this world." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My hands went cold, and my stomach churned. I wanted to confront her right there and then, but something held me back. Ben's voice in my head, reminding me that anger would get me nowhere without proof. Ben Hudson is an old friend, a former private investigator who knows a thing or two about these kinds of things. We met for drinks that same night. I told him everything while nursing a beer, my hands gripping the bottle, so tight, I thought it might shatter. "You need to stay calm," Ben said, his voice steady and practical. "Jumping the gun without evidence will just give her the upper hand. You need to be smart about this." His advice made sense, though it pissed me off. All I wanted was to scream at Dahlia, demand answers, maybe even make a scene. But Ben was right. A confrontation without proof would backfire, and I'd look like the paranoid, insecure husband. So, what do? I asked, feeling helpless and exposed. Ben leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "You gather evidence. Watch her patterns. If she's cheating, you'll find out soon enough." I left the bar that night with a pit in my stomach. The reality of what might be happening was too much to process all at once. I kept replaying the message from Kevin in my mind, dissecting every word, every emoji, trying to make sense of it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed next to Dahlia, who was fast asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I knew what I had to do next. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. It was going to be an investigation. And if what I feared was true, then she wasn't just betraying me. She was tearing down everything we'd built together, brick by brick. And if that was the case, well, I'd make damn sure she felt every ounce of the pain she'd put me through. After that night, something inside me switched. I wasn't going to sit around wondering anymore. I needed to know the truth, no matter how ugly it was. So, I took Ben's advice and decided to gather evidence before making any moves. If Dahlia was cheating, she was going to regret every moment of it. The first step was to get access to her phone. I found a tracking app that could quietly monitor her texts and locations without setting off any alarms. It took a bit of time and patience, but one night when Dahlia was in the shower, I managed to install it. My heart was racing the whole time, palms sweaty, pulse thumping in my ears, but I got it done, and then I waited. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to scroll through emails while Dahlia made herself coffee, oblivious to the fact that every text she sent would now end up in my hands. I watched her hum to herself, all innocent, as if nothing was wrong. It took every ounce of self-control not to smash the mug right there on the counter and demand the truth. But no, Ben had told me to be patient, and I was going to play this smart. It didn't take long before the messages started rolling in. Kevin, can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? Dahlia, soon winking face can't wait either. I stared at the screen, feeling like someone had poured ice water over me. There it was, proof that she wasn't just spending late nights at the office. She was with Kevin, and they weren't exactly working on spreadsheets. Over the next few days, I kept reading their exchanges, each message more painful than the last. They talked about meeting for drinks, about sneaking away during work hours for lunch dates that were clearly more than just meals. Kevin's words were full of flattery, the kind that makes a woman feel like she's 25 again. But the message that broke me came late one night. Kevin, I feel young again when I'm with you. Young. That one word hit harder than anything else. I knew what it meant. He made her feel alive, something she apparently wasn't getting from me anymore. And the worst part? She responded with a heart emoji. That night, I lay awake next to her, every text playing on a loop in my mind. Her body was warm beside me, but she felt a million miles away. I wanted to shake her awake, demand answers, scream at her for betraying me. But I kept quiet. I needed more. Then came the night that confirmed everything. Dahlia told me she was going to visit a friend, some old coworker I didn't even know. I nodded and smiled, playing the part of the clueless husband. But as soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I stayed a few cars behind, careful not to be spotted, until I saw her pull into the parking lot of a fancy little restaurant downtown. And there he was, Kevin, waiting for her at the entrance with that cocky grin plastered on his face. She practically floated into his arms, and they held hands like giddy teenagers. I watched from the shadows as they shared dinner, their heads close together, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. When they left the restaurant, they didn't bother saying goodbye at the curb. No, they got into a cab, together, and headed straight to a hotel. I followed them all the way to the entrance, my stomach twisting in knots. I stood there, staring at the revolving doors, knowing exactly what was going to happen next. I could have stormed in, made a scene, dragged her out by the arm, and humiliated her in front of Kevin and everyone else. But I didn't. Instead, I turned around and walked back to my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel the entire drive home. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. There was one more thing I needed to do. A couple of days later, I dropped by her office under the pretense of bringing her lunch. I wasn't there for Dahlia, though. I wanted to meet Lillian Drake. She was another marketing specialist, one who had always resented Dahlia's success. I figured if anyone knew about the affair, it would be Lillian. She didn't disappoint. The moment I mentioned Kevin's name, Lillian's expression shifted. She leaned back in her chair, a sly smile creeping across her face. "Oh, so you know about them?" she said, sounding almost amused. "It's not exactly a secret around here." I felt my stomach turn. "So, everyone knows?" "Pretty much." She shrugged, clearly enjoying my discomfort. "They're not exactly subtle. I've seen them sneaking out together more times than I can count. Honestly, I'm surprised you didn't know sooner. I clenched my jaw, struggling to keep my composure. I hated the way she was looking at me, like I was some clueless idiot who had been duped. Then she leaned forward, her smile turning conspiratorial. If you're looking to even the score, I could help with that. Her words hung in the air between us, thick with implication. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, but then a thought crossed my mind. If Dahlia could betray me so easily, maybe it was time I played by her rules. I gave Lillian a small, calculated smile. Tell me more. And just like that, the first piece of my plan fell into place. Once Lillian dangled the opportunity in front of me, I didn't hesitate. If Dahlia wanted to play dirty, I'd make damn sure she tasted her own poison. Lillian was more than willing to be part of the game. It wasn't love, not even lust, just mutual convenience, fueled by anger and the need to hurt someone else. It started innocently enough, if you can call any of this innocent. We exchanged numbers, and the texts escalated fast. She knew exactly what I wanted, and I knew what she was after. This wasn't about romance or long-term plans. It was two people using each other, plain and simple, and in a way that made it easier. No feelings, no strings, just revenge. The first time we met outside of her office, I booked a room at a hotel across town. There was no hesitation on her part. Lillian showed up in a tight black dress, her perfume heavy in the air as she sauntered toward me like she owned the place. We didn't waste time on small talk. That night, I learned two things. Lillian was just as angry at Dahlia as I was, and she was just as eager to tear her down. After that, we started meeting regularly, sometimes at her place, other times in my car in some parking lot where no one would recognize us. But my favorite rendezvous points were right under Dahlia's nose, our house. I made sure there were signs of our encounters scattered here and there. A stray earring left accidentally on the couch, a wine glass left behind on the coffee table, just enough lipstick on the rim to make her pause. The scent of Lillian's perfume lingering faintly on the pillows. Subtle clues. I wanted Dahlia to feel the unease, to sense that something was slipping out of her control. At first, she didn't seem to notice, or maybe she chose to ignore it, hoping it was just her imagination. But I could see the tension creeping into her. She'd frown at the wine glass or glance at the earring, her expression shifting briefly before she forced a smile. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head, but she didn't say anything. Not yet. Meanwhile, things between Lillian and me grew bolder. I wasn't careful anymore, not like I had been with Dahlia. We'd meet at the house during the day, knowing Dahlia wouldn't be home. I made sure the sheets smelled like Lillian when Dahlia crawled into bed at night. It was a sick, twisted pleasure, knowing that she was sleeping in the evidence of my betrayal without even realizing it. But the real joy came from the conversations I had with Dahlia. I started asking her questions. Loaded, rhetorical ones designed to chip away at her composure. So, how was your meeting with your friend tonight? I'd ask with a smirk as she walked in the door, tired from her supposed work outings. She'd stiffen, her smile faltering for a moment before she recovered. Fine, nothing special. I'd hum in response, letting the silence linger just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I'd drop another casual grenade. I've been thinking we should spend more time with each other. Maybe get away for a weekend? Unless you're too busy with work. Her eyes would narrow, and I could see the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. But she never took the bait. Not yet. She'd just brush off my comments with a laugh or a quick change of subject, pretending everything was fine. But I knew better. I could see the cracks forming in her carefully constructed world, and I reveled in it. Each time I left something of Lillian's in plain sight, each time I asked a pointed question, I was tightening the noose just a little bit more. At night, lying in bed next to Dahlia, I could feel the distance between us growing wider. It was like we were two strangers pretending to be married. Her body was there, but her mind was somewhere else, probably with Kevin. And honestly, I didn't care. I was too busy planning my next move. Lillian, for her part, was loving every second of it. She thrived on the chaos we were creating. You think she suspects? She asked me one afternoon, running her fingers lazily down my chest as we lay tangled in the sheets. Oh, she suspects, I replied with a grin. She just doesn't know what to do about it. Lillian chuckled, a low, throaty sound that made my skin crawl in the best way possible. Good. I hope it drives her crazy. It was like playing a game of chess. Each move carefully calculated, each step designed to push Dahlia closer to the edge without sending her over. At least, not yet. I wasn't just cheating on her. I was dismantling her, piece by piece, making sure she felt every moment of the betrayal, just like she'd done to me. But the most satisfying part was knowing that Dahlia was starting to sense the shift. She wasn't stupid. She could tell something was off, even if she didn't want to admit it. The way I smiled at her when she came home, the way I casually mentioned her meetings with friends, the way I touched her less and less, it was all part of the plan. And I could see it eating away at her, bit by bit. One night, she finally cracked, just a little. We were sitting at the dinner table, eating in awkward silence, when she put down her fork and looked at me, her expression guarded. "Milo, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. I shrugged, not bothering to meet her eyes. Why wouldn't it be? She hesitated, chewing on her lip the way she always did when she was nervous. I feel like we've been off lately, like there's this distance between us. I finally looked up, meeting her gaze with a calm smile. Yeah? Maybe it's because you're always so busy with work. Her face twisted for a brief second. Anger, guilt, maybe both, before she forced a tight smile. You know how things are. Lots of deadlines. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. Right? Deadlines. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, like the calm before a storm. I could see the doubt creeping into her, the fear that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one with secrets. And that's exactly where I wanted her. The tracking app confirmed what I'd been waiting for. Dahlia and Kevin had planned another night together at their favorite hotel. It wasn't a surprise at this point, just another confirmation of what I already knew. But this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. Tonight would be the night everything unraveled, and I wanted her to feel every second of it. I called Lillian that afternoon. "You busy tonight?" I asked casually. Her laugh echoed on the other end of the line. "Not for you, Milo. What's the plan?" "I need you to come over. Make yourself comfortable." I smirked, knowing exactly what I had in mind. "We're going to leave a few souvenirs." Lillian was all in. She loved the idea, maybe a little too much. She arrived around 8 p.m., wearing a dress that was more appropriate for a nightclub than a quiet night in. I poured us both a glass of wine, and we didn't waste much time. We knew what we were there to do, and neither of us had any interest in dragging it out. The sex was mechanical, driven more by the thrill of revenge than passion. Lillian wasn't gentle, and neither was I. We were both feeding off the same dark energy, knowing that every moment we spent together was another nail in Dahlia's coffin. The room filled with the smell of perfume, sweat, and cheap wine, exactly what I wanted. When it was over, we stayed on the couch, sipping wine and talking in hushed tones like two conspirators plotting their next heist. I leaned over, grabbed my phone from the coffee table, and snapped a quick photo of us tangled on the couch, her lipstick smudged across her face, my shirt halfway unbuttoned. It was the kind of picture that would tell a story all on its own, if I needed it to. "Think she'll notice the lipstick on the glass?" Lillian asked, running her fingers through my hair. "Oh, she'll notice," I said with a grin. "And if she doesn't, the earring on the couch will do the trick." Lillian chuckled, clearly enjoying the chaos we were about to unleash. "You're a dangerous man, Milo. Only when I need to be." We stayed up late, making sure the evidence was scattered just enough to be obvious, but not too obvious. A wine glass with lipstick stains left casually on the table. Lillian's perfume lingering on the pillows. The sheets tangled from our time in bed. By the time we were done, the house was a crime scene of infidelity, and I wanted Dahlia to see every bit of it. Lillian left a little after 2 a.m., planting a kiss on my cheek before slipping out the door. "Good luck," she whispered with a wicked smile. "Text me when the fireworks start." I sat on the couch, sipping the last of the wine, waiting. I knew Dahlia would be home soon, and I wanted to be ready. My heart was pounding, but not from nerves. It was anticipation. I wanted to see the look on her face when she walked through that door. Around 6 a.m., I heard the familiar sound of her keys rattling in the lock. I stayed seated on the couch, perfectly calm, as the door swung open. Dahlia stepped inside, looking exhausted but happy, probably still glowing from her night with Kevin. But the moment she entered the living room, she froze. Her eyes darted around, taking in the wine glasses, the pillows, the scent of perfume that wasn't hers. I watched as her face shifted, confusion first, then realization, and finally panic. "Milo," she began, her voice faltering. "Well, what's going on?" I leaned back, arms draped lazily over the back of the couch, and gave her a slow, knowing smile. "What's the matter, Dahlia? Something wrong?" Her eyes landed on the earring, Lillian's, sitting innocently on the armrest of the couch. She looked from the earring to the wine glasses, her breath hitching. I could practically see the wheels spinning in her head, trying to piece together the puzzle that was already solved. She took a step closer, the scent of Lillian's perfume hitting her like a slap to the face. Who was here?" she demanded, her voice trembling. I tilted my head, pretending to think. "Oh, just a friend. You know, like how you've been meeting with your friend, Kevin." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I reached for my phone, unlocked it, and pulled up the photo of Lillian and me on the couch. I held it out to her, watching as her expression shifted from shock to disbelief to pure, unfiltered rage. "Now we're even," I said softly, enjoying every syllable as it left my lips. Dahlia's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air, completely out of her depth. And in that moment, I saw her for what she really was, someone who thought she could have it all without consequences. She finally found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. You cheated on me?" I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. "Yep, just like you've been cheating on me with Kevin." Her face contorted with fury. "You bastard." I shrugged, completely unfazed. "Guess that makes two of us." She stood there, shaking with anger, her fists clenched at her sides. I could tell she wanted to scream, to hit me, to do something, anything, but she was paralyzed by the weight of her own guilt. And that was the best part. She couldn't accuse me of anything without exposing herself. No matter how furious she was, she knew she'd lost. I leaned back on the couch, completely at ease. "So, how was your night with Kevin? Good, I assume?" She glared at me, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to control her breathing. "You're a fucking monster," she hissed. I smiled, taking another sip of wine. "Takes one to know one." She stormed off toward the bedroom, slamming the door behind her, and I just sat there, feeling more satisfied than I had in years. The game was over, and I'd won. The morning after Dahlia found out about Lillian, things exploded just as I expected. But I was ready. I knew her anger would come with accusations, and I was more than prepared to flip the script. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, her face was a storm of fury and betrayal. "You really think you can cheat on me and get away with it?" She spat, standing at the edge of the living room like she was ready to throw something. I didn't flinch. I stayed seated on the couch, calm as a monk, and pulled out my phone without a word. "Before you start throwing stones, Dahlia, maybe take a look at this." I swiped through the screenshots. Every flirtatious message she and Kevin had exchanged. There were enough heart emojis and late-night rendezvous plans to sink a marriage. And I saved the best for last. A candid photo of the two of them at the entrance of the hotel, her hand resting on his arm. Both of them smiling like teenagers in love. I held the phone out for her to see. "Recognize these?" I asked, my voice steady. Her face went pale as she stared at the screen. The righteous anger she'd walked in with melted into panic, her eyes darting between me and the damning evidence. This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, scrambling to regain control. "Kevin and I, it's not serious. It was just..." I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "Save it. I don't care what excuses you've got. The point is you lied. You cheated." I let the words hang in the air, heavy and final. "So don't act like you're the victim here." Her jaw clenched, and I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out her next move. But she was out of cards to play, and she knew it. And as if on cue, Kevin proved just how much of a coward he really was. A few days later, I got word that he had cut things off with Dahlia completely. He was too smart or too scared, to let an affair derail his career. He ghosted her without so much as a goodbye text. Dahlia was left standing alone in the rubble of her bad decisions, and I wasn't about to pick up the pieces. Once Kevin was out of the picture, I made my next move. I wasn't going to waste any more time playing house with a woman who had burned everything we built to the ground. I called a lawyer the very next morning and filed for divorce. This wasn't going to be a messy, drawn-out ordeal. I hired the best attorney I could find, someone ruthless, the kind of person who treats divorce like warfare. I wanted this over fast, and I wanted it to hurt Dahlia just enough to make her realize the magnitude of her betrayal. When I served her the papers, she tried to act like she was blindsided. "You're really going to throw away 10 years of marriage over this?" she asked, her voice dripping with faux sadness. I gave her a hard, cold stare. "You already threw it away the moment you brought Kevin into our bed, whether literally or just in your head." She didn't have much to say after that. The court hearing came faster than I expected, which was fine by me. I wanted everything finalized and behind me as soon as possible. Dahlia showed up with her own lawyer, and she made one last pathetic attempt to squeeze more alimony out of me. "He can afford more," she argued, glancing at the judge with teary eyes. "After all, he's the one who's been unfaithful." My lawyer didn't even blink. He stood up calmly, opened a folder, and laid out every piece of evidence I had collected. The messages, the photos, the hotel receipts. He presented it all with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. The judge flipped through the evidence, his face unreadable. Then he looked at Dahlia, and for the first time, I saw it really hit her. There was no coming back from this. She had no leverage, no sob story to sway the court. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered something in her ear, probably advising her to cut her losses. She looked like she might cry, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. She made her bed. Now she had to lie in it alone. The judge's ruling was swift. The prenup we had in place, something Dahlia had scoffed at when we first got married, held firm. She would get a modest settlement, just enough to cover her basic needs, but there would be no alimony. And since we didn't have kids, there was nothing else to fight over. When the judge banged his gavel, it felt like the closing chapter of a book I should have stopped reading years ago. As we left the courtroom, Dahlia tried one last time to talk to me. "Milo, we could have fixed this," she said, her voice trembling. "We could have started over." I shook my head, the finality of my decision settling over me like a weight lifting. "No, Dahlia, you broke it, and I don't pick up broken things." She opened her mouth to say something, but I turned and walked away before she could. I didn't need to hear her excuses. There was nothing left to say. By the time I got to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was over. The lies, the betrayal, the endless nights wondering where she was, it was all done. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Dahlia could figure out her own mess. As far as I was concerned, I didn't owe her anything anymore. She made her choices, and now she could live with the consequences. After the divorce was finalized, I knew I had to leave everything behind. Staying in the same town, surrounded by old memories and familiar places, would only keep me trapped in the past. I needed a clean slate, somewhere far away from the echoes of my marriage. So I sold the house, every last bit of it, and set off for a new city, somewhere I could rebuild from the ground up. Moving wasn't just about distance. It was about reclaiming the life I had buried under 10 years of compromises. I had always dreamed of opening a cafe, but somehow along the way, that dream had been put on hold. Dahlia never thought it was a practical idea, and I'd let her convince me that it wasn't worth the risk. But now it was my turn to decide what was worth it. The first few months were exhausting, but exhilarating. I found a small, charming space in a busy part of town, a perfect corner lot with big windows that let in a flood of natural light. I poured everything into that cafe, from choosing the beans to designing the menu. It became my obsession, the thing that filled the quiet spaces where regret and anger used to live. When the doors finally opened, I wasn't sure what to expect, but the place took off quicker than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about the coffee, though people did seem to love it. It was about the vibe, the sense of community. Locals came in for their morning fix, and soon enough, the cafe became a kind of second home for people. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that was truly mine. Running the cafe was more than just a job. It was freedom. I wasn't answering to anyone but myself. Every decision, every little success was mine to claim. I found joy in the small things, like chatting with regulars, trying out new brews, and staying late to rearrange the space just because I could. It felt good. It felt right. And then I met Cassandra. It was at a local art event one weekend. I had forced myself to go, figuring I needed to start meeting new people and getting out of my own head. I was browsing a display of paintings when a woman next to me made a comment about the ridiculous price tag on one of the pieces. "Who pays $5,000 for a painting that looks like it was done by a drunk toddler?" she asked, her voice light but full of humor. I turned, and there she was, Cassandra Mason. She wasn't flashy or overly done up like some of the women I had met in my old life. She had this natural charm, a warm smile, and a down-to-earth vibe that immediately put me at ease. We ended up talking for the rest of the night, moving from the art gallery to a nearby bar, swapping stories over drinks. There was something about her, an honesty that felt refreshing, like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocating in secrets and lies. We didn't rush things, and that made it even better. We took our time, meeting for coffee, going on walks, getting to know each other without any pretense or pressure. She knew about my past, at least the broad strokes, and she never judged me for it. In fact, she admired the way I had picked myself up and started over. "This cafe," she said one evening as we sat outside, watching the sunset, "it's not just a business, is it? It's a whole new life." I nodded, realizing how right she was. It's something like that. Being with Cassandra was easy in a way that I hadn't known was possible. There were no games, no lies, just two people figuring things out together. We started dreaming up plans, talking about trips we wanted to take, places we wanted to explore. I told her about my idea to open another cafe someday, maybe even expand into new ventures. "Why stop at just one?" she teased, her eyes sparkling. "You could open a whole chain." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," I said with a laugh. But the truth was I liked the idea. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an adventure. Our relationship grew naturally, without drama or complications. Cassandra wasn't just someone to fill the void Dahlia had left. She was someone I could actually build a life with, one based on trust and mutual respect. And I found that with her, I didn't need to carry the baggage of my past anymore. I wasn't bitter or angry about Dahlia and Kevin. They were nothing more than a bad chapter in a book I had already finished. And now I was writing a new one that was mine from the first word to the last. As Cassandra and I sat on the beach one evening, talking about our next trip, I realized something that felt almost surreal. I was happy, truly, deeply happy. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was free. Free to live on my own terms, free to love without fear, and free to finally leave the pain of the past behind me. And that, I realized, was the best kind of revenge. Not anger, not bitterness, just living well,